Section 1 of The Case of the Pool of Blood in the Pastor's Study, by Grace Isabel Colbron and Auguste Groner. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read for you today by Dawn Larson in Minnesota. Section 1. Introduction to Joe Muller. Joe Muller, Secret Service detective of the Imperial Austrian Police, is one of the great experts in his profession. In personality he differs greatly from other famous detectives. He has neither the impressive authority of Sherlock Holmes nor the keen brilliancy of Monsieur Lecoq. Muller is a small, slight, plain-looking man of indefinite age, and of much humbleness of mien. A naturally retiring, modest disposition, and two external causes are the reasons for Muller's humbleness of manner, which is his chief characteristic. One cause is the fact that in early youth a miscarriage of justice gave him several years in prison, an experience which cast a stigma on his name, and which made it impossible for him, for many years after, to obtain honest employment. But the world is richer and safer by Muller's early misfortune. For it was this experience which threw him back on his own peculiar talents for a livelihood, and drove him into the police force. Had he been able to enter any other profession, his genius might have been stunted to a mere pastime, instead of being, as now, utilized for the public good. Then the red tape and bureaucratic etiquette which attaches to every governmental department puts the Secret Service men of the Imperial Police on a par with the lower ranks of the subordinates. Muller's official rank is scarcely much higher than that of a policeman, although kings and councillors consult him, and the police department realizes to the full what a treasure it has in him. But official red tape and his early misfortune prevent the giving of any higher official standing to even such a genius. Born and bred to such conditions, Muller understands them, and his natural modesty of disposition asks for no outward honors, asks for nothing but an income sufficient for his simple needs, and for aid and opportunity to occupy himself in the way he most enjoys. Joseph Muller's character is a strange mixture. The kindest-hearted man in the world, he is a human bloodhound when once the lure of the trail has caught him. He scarcely eats or sleeps when the chase is on. He does not seem to know human weakness nor fatigue, in spite of his frail body. Once put on a case, his mind delves and delves until it finds a clue. Then something awakens within him, a spirit akin to that which holds the bloodhound nose to the trail, and he will accomplish the apparently impossible. He will track down his victim when the entire machinery of a great police department seems helpless to discover anything. The high chiefs and commissioners grant a condescending permission when Muller asks, "May I do this?" or "May I handle this case this way?" both parties knowing all the while that it is a farce, and that the department waits helpless until this humble little man saves its honor by solving some problem before which its intricate machinery has stood dazed and puzzled. This call of the trail is something that is stronger than anything else in Muller's mentality, and now and then it brings him into conflict with the department, or with his own better nature. Sometimes his unerring instinct discovers secrets in high places, secrets which the police department is bidden to hush up and leave untouched. Muller is then taken off the case, and left idle for a while if he persists in his opinion as to the true facts. And at other times Muller's own warm heart gets him into trouble. He will track down his victim, driven by the power in his soul which is stronger than all volition, but when he has the victim in his net, he will sometimes discover him to be a much finer, better man than the other individual whose wrong at this particular criminal's hand set in motion the machinery of justice. Several times that has happened to Muller, and each time his heart got the better of his professional instinct, and his practical common sense too, perhaps, at least as far as his own advancement was concerned, and he warned the victim, defeating his own work. This peculiarity of Muller's character caused his undoing at last, his official undoing, that is, and compelled his retirement from the force. But his advice is often sought unofficially by the department, and to those who know, Muller's hand can be seen in the unravelling of many a famous case. The following stories are but a few of the many interesting cases that have come within the experience of this great detective, but they give a fair portrayal of Muller's peculiar method of working, his looking on himself as merely an humble member of the department, and the comedy of his acting under official orders, when the department is in reality following out his directions. End of introduction. The case of the pool of blood in the pastor's study. The sun rose slowly over the great bulk of the Carpathian Mountains, lying along the horizon, weird giant shapes in the early morning mist. It was still very quiet in the village. A cock crowed here and there, and swallows flew chirping close to the ground, darting swiftly about, preparing for their higher flight. Janci the shepherd, apparently the only human being already up, stood beside the brook at the point where the old bridge spans the streamlet, still turbulent from the mountain floods. Janci was cutting willows to make his Margit a new basket. Once the shepherd raised his head from his work, for he thought he heard a loud laugh somewhere in the distance. But all seemed silent, and he turned back to his willows. The beauty of the landscape about him was much too familiar a thing that he should have felt or seen its charm. The violet hue of the distant woods, the red gleaming of the heather-strewn moor, with its patches of swamp from which the slow mist arose, the pretty little village with its handsome old church and attractive rectory. Janci had known it so long that he never stopped to realize how very charming, in its gentle melancholy, it all was. Also Janci did not know that this little village of his home had once been a flourishing city, and that an invasion of the Turks had razed it to the ground, leaving, as by a miracle, only the church to tell of its former glories. The sun rose higher and higher, and now the village awoke to its daily life. Voices of cattle and noises of poultry were heard about the houses, and men and women began their accustomed round of tasks. Janci found that he had gathered enough willow twigs by this time. He tied them into a loose bundle and started on his homeward way. His path led through wide-stretched fields and vineyards, past a little hill, some distance from the village, on which stood a small house. It was not a pleasant house to look at, not a house one would care to even live in, if one did not know its use, for it looked bare and repellent, covered with its ugly yellow paint, and with all the windows secured with heavy iron bars. The trees that surrounded it were tall and thick with foliage, casting an additional gloom over the forbidding appearance of the house. At the foot of the hill was a high iron fence, cutting off what lay behind it from all the rest of the world. For this ugly yellow house enclosed in its walls a goodly sum of hopeless human misery and misfortune. It was an insane asylum. For 20 years now the asylum had stood on its hill, a source of superstitious terror to the villagers, but at the same time a source of additional income. It meant money for them, for it afforded a constant and ever open market for their farm products and the output of their home industry. But every now and then a scream or a harsh laugh would ring out from behind those barred windows, and those in the village who could hear would shiver and cross themselves. Shepherd Janci had little fear of the big house. His little hut cowered close by the high iron gates, and he had a personal acquaintance with most of the patients, with all the attendants, and most of all with the kind elderly physician who was the head of the establishment. Janci knew them all, and had a kind word equally for all. But otherwise he was a silent man, living much within himself. When the shepherd reached his little home, his wife came to meet him with a call to breakfast. As they sat down at the table, a shadow moved past the little window. Janci looked up. "Who was that?" asked Margit, looking up from her folded hands. She had just finished her murmured prayer. "Liska," replied Janci indifferently, beginning his meal. Liska was the local abbreviation for Elizabeth. "In such a hurry?" thought the shepherd's wife. Her curiosity would not let her rest. "I hope his reverence isn't ill again," she remarked after a while. Janci did not hear her, for he was very busy picking a fly out of his cup of milk. "Do you think Liska was going for the old man?" began Margit again after a few minutes. The old man was the name given by the people of the village, more as a term of endearment than anything else, to the generally loved and respected physician who was the head of the insane asylum. He had become general mentor and oracle of all the village, and was known and loved by man, woman, and child. "It's possible," answered Janci. "His reverence didn't look very well yesterday, or maybe the old housekeeper has the gout again." Janci gave a grunt which might have meant anything. The shepherd was a silent man. Being alone so much had taught him to find his own thoughts sufficient company. 10 minutes passed in silence since Margit's last question, then someone went past the window. There were two people this time, Liska and the old doctor. They were walking very fast, running almost. Margit sprang up and hurried to the door to look after them. Janci sat still in his place, but he laid aside his spoon, and with wide eyes was staring ahead of him, murmuring, "It's the pastor this time. I saw him, just as I did the others. Shepherd, the innkeeper wants to see you. There's something the matter with his cow." Count Blank, a young man, coming from the other direction and pushing in at the door past Margit, stood there staring up the road. Janci was so deep in his own thoughts that he apparently did not hear the boy's words. At all events he did not answer them, but himself asked an unexpected question, a question that was not addressed to the others in the room, but to something out and beyond them. It was a strange question, and it came from the lips of a man whose mind was not with his body at the moment, whose mind saw what others did not. "Who will be next to go? And who will be our pastor now?" These were Janci's words. "What are you talking about, shepherd? Is it another one of your visions?" exclaimed the young man who stood there before him. Janci rubbed his hands over his eyes and seemed to come down to earth with a start. "Oh, is that you, Ferenz? What do you want of me?" The boy gave his message again, and Janci nodded good humoredly and followed him out of the house. But both he and his young companion were very thoughtful as they plodded along the way. The boy did not dare to ask any questions, for he knew that the shepherd was not likely to answer. There was a silent understanding among the villagers that no one should annoy Janci in any way, for they stood in strange awe of him, although he was the most good-natured mortal under the sun. While the shepherd and the boy walked toward the inn, the old doctor and Liska had hurried onward to the rectory. They were met at the door by the aged housekeeper, who staggered down the path, wringing her hands, unable to voice anything but inarticulate expressions of grief and terror. The rest of the household and the farm hands were gathered in a frightened group in the great courtyard of the stately rectory, which had once been a convent building. The physician hurried up the stairs into the pastor's apartments. These were high, sunny, and airy rooms with arched ceilings, deep window seats, great heavy doors, and handsomely ornamented stoves. The simple modern furniture appeared still more plain and commonplace by contrast with the huge spaces of the building. In one of the rooms a gendarme was standing beside the window. The man saluted the physician, then shrugged his shoulders with an expression of hopelessness. The doctor returned a silent greeting and passed through into the next apartment. The old man was paler than usual, and his face bore an expression of pain and surprise, the same expression that showed in the faces of those gathered downstairs. The room he now entered was large like the others, the walls handsomely decorated, and every corner of it was flooded with sunshine. There were two men in this room, the village magistrate and the notary. Their expression as they held their hands out to the doctor showed that his coming brought great relief. And there was something else in the room, something that drew the eyes of all of the men immediately after their silent greeting. This was a great pool of blood which lay as a hideous stain on the otherwise clean yellow painted floor. The blood must have flowed from a dreadful wound, from a severed artery even, the doctor thought, there was such a quantity of it. It had already dried and darkened, making its terrifying ugliness the more apparent. "This is the third murder in 2 years," said the magistrate in a low voice. "And the most mysterious of them all," added the clerk. "Yes, it is," said the doctor. "And there is not a trace of the body, you say? Nor a clue as to where they might have taken the dead or dying man?" With these words he looked carefully around the room, but there was no more blood to be seen anywhere. Any spot would have been clearly visible on the light-colored floor. There was nothing else to tell of the horrible crime that had been committed here, nothing but the great hideous brown-red spot in the middle of the room. "Have you made a thorough search for the body?" asked the doctor. The magistrate shook his head. "No, I have done nothing to speak of yet. We have been waiting for you. There is a gendarme at the gate. No one can go in or out without being seen." "Very well, then, let us begin our search now." The magistrate and his companion turned towards the door of the room, but the doctor motioned them to come back. "I see you do not know the house as well as I do," he said, and led the way towards a niche in the side of the wall, which was partially filled by a high bookcase. "Ah, that is the entrance of the passage to the church?" asked the magistrate in surprise. "Yes, this is it. The door is not locked." "You mean you believe—" "That the murderers came in from the church? Why not? It is quite possible." "To think of such a thing!" exclaimed the notary, with a shake of his head. The doctor laughed bitterly. "To those who are planning a murder, a church is no more than any other place. There is a bolt here, as you see. I will close this bolt now. Then we can leave the room knowing that no one can enter it without being seen." The simple furniture of the study, a desk, a sofa, a couple of chairs, and several bookcases, gave no chance of any hiding place either for the body of the victim or for the murderers. When the men left the room the magistrate locked the door and put the key in his own pocket. The gendarme in the neighboring apartment was sent down to stand in the courtyard at the entrance to the house. The sexton, a little hunchback, was ordered to remain in the vestry at the other end of the passage from the church to the house. Then the thorough search of the house began. Every room in both stories, every corner of the attic and cellar was looked over thoroughly. The stable, the barns, the garden, and even the wall underwent a close examination. There was no trace of a body anywhere, not even a trail of blood. Nothing which would give the slightest clue as to how the murderers had entered, how they had fled, or what they had done with their victim. The great gate of the courtyard was closed. The men, reinforced by farm hands, entered the church, while Liska and the dairymaids huddled in the servants' dining room in a trembling group around the old housekeeper. The search in the church as well as in the vestry was equally in vain. There was no trace to be found there any more than in the house. Section 2